Hi there and welcome. I hope you're all doing well. My name is Luisa, but everybody calls me Lu. I've noticed over the years that there are certain knitting tools almost everyone seems to own or recommend, and somehow I still don't feel tempted to buy them. Not because I think they are bad, and definitely not because I think people shouldn't own them, but because the longer I knit, the more I realize I'm very particular about what actually fits naturally into my knitting life. And before anyone gets nervous, this is obviously all very personal. A lot of these tools are incredibly loved in the knitting community, and I completely understand why. So I thought it would be fun to go through a few of these tools today and explain why they personally never really clicked for me and show you guys what I like to use instead. And if you enjoy cozy knitting content and rambling conversations about very specific knitting things, you can always subscribe. I would love to have you here. So let's start with, interchangeable needle sets. I know many people might not agree with me on this one, but I don't really feel the need to own multiple interchangeable needle sets from different brands. Now, I completely understand having two or three pairs of the same needle size within one system because it is so annoying having all your weights fighting over the same pair of needles. I completely get that, that makes total sense to me. But I don't really feel pulled toward collecting different interchangeable systems from multiple brands because how many sets does one person realistically need? I found needles I absolutely love. I think these are called red lace. It's the Chalgu metal set. I think they're called red lace. They don't trigger my nickel allergy. The cables are fantastic. So I just stuck with them. Now, would it be fun to try other brands like Lika or Haya? Sure, that really excites me, but I already know I love my Chalgus, and if I ended up loving another brand too, that would also mean buying new cables, new end stoppers, new cable connectors, basically a whole new set of accessories to go with them, and honestly, I don't think I want to go down the rabbit hole. But I do understand why some people like having different needle materials for different projects. Some knitters prefer metal needles for certain yarns and bamboo needles for others, and that's fine. But personally, I use my red lace chalgus for absolutely everything and I love knitting with them. And there's also another thing. I don't like feeling like I own too many things. I don't want my craft room overflowing with supplies everywhere, so I'm perfectly happy with my one interchangeable set and I don't think that's changing anytime soon. When I first started knitting, I actually bought a Knit Pro Nova set and I absolutely hated those needles. Later, I found out the problem wasn't the needles at all, it was my nickel allergy. So now that whole set belongs to a friend I'm teaching how to knit. I completely understand the appeal of collecting needle sets. They're fancy, they're pretty, they're satisfying to look at. I get it, I really do. But for me, buying an entire set just to try a different needle brand, I don't think it would work for me. A single pair for comparison, maybe, but a whole new system, probably not. And speaking of collecting knitting accessories, let's talk about fancy leather notions case. You know those gorgeous leather cases from brands like, I never know how to pronounce that, Mood, and Redesigned and Thread and Maple. They're stunning. They truly are, but for some reason I've never really felt pulled toward them. And I completely understand the appeal of beautifully curated knitting accessories and wanting your knitting life to feel elegant and intentional. That's always nice, but I just can't make those cases naturally fit into the way I knit. I would say around 80% of my knitting time happens at home, so I use little dishes and trays and bowls to organize my notions around the house instead. For example, I have this little dish here to house my light bulb stitch markers and this bamboo tray for my scissors, tape measure and things like that. And they work really well for me. Honestly, I don't think I even own a proper notions pouch. I knitted one last year, but I don't even use it to house my knitting notions. I use it for other things. When I do need a notions pouch, what I use is this one that came with my Chalgus sock set. And I take this whenever I take my knitting somewhere. And do you know what I love most about this thing? It is see-through, so I can immediately find what I'm looking for, which is especially important when I'm knitting on the train with limited space around me. So this one works for me, and I don't think I need another pouch. I think if I kept all my notions inside multiple zippered cases, it would drive me up the wall in about 5 minutes. Open one zipper for my scissors, another for tapestry needles, and then close everything back up again. It's too much fuss for me. It wouldn't work at all. But I do have a little peel case for my tiny stitch markers because otherwise I would lose them on day one. So they stay here happy and secure. But that's about it. But when it comes to my needle case, I just have this cotton one that I bought at a yarn shop a few years ago when I was traveling. It was actually meant for fixed circular needles and not interchangeable tips, so the compartments aren't perfect for how I use it, but it works. I even thought about taking it apart and turn it into a sewing project so I can customize it exactly the way I want. But first, I want to expand my most used needle sizes a little bit. And honestly, I absolutely understand the temptation of these beautiful leather cases. If they were a little less expensive, maybe I'd even feel more tempted to try one just for fun. Now, granted, I don't know anyone who owns one of these cases, so I've never seen one in person, and maybe that would change my mind, but well, I don't know. Now, one thing that really makes me hesitate is, don't they look bulky? I always feel like they would take up so much space, and I also wonder if the needle tips would scratch the leather over time and make the case look worn really quickly. Are they more durable than my cotton case? Well, probably yes, I guess so, but I've had mine for 4 years now and it still looks basically brand new. And apparently, my knitting personality is just tiny pouch and chaos because the next thing I want to show you is project bags. I already know this one might divide people a little bit, and let me be clear, I'm not a project bag hater. I really am not. But I just can't make them fit naturally into my knitting life. Here's my issue. If I'm taking my knitting on the train or to a coffee shop, to the park, or just out running errands, project bags take up a lot of space. I love using those smaller city backpacks that only fit your essentials like your wallet, your phone, an umbrella, and a few other things. And they are really comfortable, they are lightweight, they are practical, I love them. But most project bags don't fit inside them. So then I have to transfer everything into a larger backpack, which I personally don't enjoy carrying as much. So I'd have to carry the project bag in my hand all day long. I'd give myself about a week before forgetting it on the train somewhere along with my knitting inside. At home, which is where I spend most of my knitting time, I also don't really enjoy storing my projects in bags. I much prefer baskets. I've had these metal mesh baskets for a long time, but my needles love to poke through the mesh, so I had to use point protectors all the time. But a few weeks ago, my mom gave me her fabric baskets. I don't know how to call this. They didn't work for what she had in mind, and they are safer for my needles. They are sturdy enough to hold their shape, so I love them. Thanks, Mom. And if I can see my project, I feel more excited to work on it. If it disappears into a bag, I'm way more likely to forget it exists, and baskets are just practical for me. I can grab one and take it to the back patio or move it around the house easily without having to stuff everything into a bag and zip it closed. Now, if project bags work beautifully for your knitting life, that's amazing. I can absolutely see why people love them. They just don't really work for me personally as a whip storage. For other things like storing craft supplies and housing yarn and so on, they're perfect though. I love them for that. Now, the only proper project bag I own is this one here. I bought it at a local knick-knack shop for around 15 euros and it was actually sold as a toiletry bag. But I mostly got it because I was curious about the inside compartments. They looked like the ones from Mud and redesigned. And honestly, I almost never use it for the exact reasons I just mentioned. What I do like using instead when I take my knitting on the go is this little bag here. It does kind of look like a project bag, but it was actually sold as a reusable bread bag. It cost me around €3. It has no compartments at all. It's just one big open space, and honestly, it works perfectly fine. But my favorite option lately has been this mesh produce bag from the grocery store. This is the perfect knitting bag for me. They weigh almost nothing. They fold into whatever shape I need to fit inside my backpack. They are see-through so I can easily find things, and they fit an entire sweater plus my notions pouch without any problems. And I completely understand that proper project bags add something fun and exciting to the project inside. I've seen people saying switching to a fresh bag makes them excited to work on another whip again, and I totally get that. I think that's a really good way to feel excited about your knitting. But for me personally, if I can't see the project, it just stops existing in my brain a little bit, so it doesn't work. So clearly, I'm not a very accessories driven knitter, and that also applies to blocking tools. I could definitely change my mind in the future about this one, but as of right now, I don't really feel tempted to buy those comb style knit blockers. And I understand why people love them. They look practical, satisfying to use, and definitely time saving, because instead of placing one or five individual pins, you just pin one comb into the mat and you're done. I also imagine they make it easier to get really straight lines when blocking. And that sounds really good. But here's the thing, I don't actually use that many pins when I block my projects. I usually add a few around the hem of a sweater if I want to stretch the ribbing a little to match the width of the body better and things like that, but I almost never pin an entire sweater aggressively into place. So I can't really justify buying knit blockers for the way I personally block my knits. The few times I did pin an entire sweater really firmly into place, I felt like the fabric just relaxed back into its preferred size after a few hours anyway. So nowadays I mostly pin when there's a lace involved, when I want to open up a ribbing, or when it actually feels necessary. I also never pin my swatches anymore because I felt slightly betrayed by them the few times I did that. They looked amazing pinned into place and they completely changed once unpinned. So now I just give them a good stretch with my hands now and then and let them dry naturally. And if I'm being honest, blocking just isn't frustrating enough for me personally to make placing a few pins feel annoying. And when I do use pins, I just use regular sewing pins with the little bow tips on them, like this one. I hope you can see. Yeah, that was a bad idea. Like this. They work perfectly well, they are durable, they are heat resistant, which is important when I occasionally use a steamer, and I like having one type of pin that works for everything. And I also own those T-pins. I think they are called T-pins. They came with my blocking mats, but I literally never used them. I think a good way to use them would be as tightening keys for my Chalgo interchangeable needles. Yeah, but my regular pins, the ballpoint ones, work just fine. And the holes the T-pins leave in the mats annoy me so much more, so I just don't use them. And for now, I am perfectly happy with my little sewing pins. Now, another area where I realized my brain works very differently from what knitting projects seem to expect is when it comes to project notebooks or knitting journals. I feel like knitting journals are becoming more and more popular lately, at least in the yarn shops I visit, and they are really, really nice. They usually include dedicated spaces for things like needle size, gauge, yarn information, and all kinds of project details, which is genuinely practical, but they also tend to include pages for common abbreviations, needle conversion charts, standard body measurements, and things like that. And can I be honest? I never use those pages. So for me, they end up feeling like a bit of a waste of space. And another thing that really confuses me, why do they only give you this teeny tiny little space to write down the yarn and brand name? Sometimes I barely have enough room to fit the information I actually want to keep track of, and that annoys me to no end. Meanwhile, there are huge sections I personally don't really need. And the biggest issue for me is that my note taking habits are wildly inconsistent. Sometimes I'll fill 2 or 3 pages with detailed notes for one project, and other times I barely write down the name of the pattern. So, whenever I use a dedicated knitting journal and leave sections blank, my brain immediately goes, well, I wasted the notebook. And then I start writing things down just to fill the pages, which makes absolutely no sense, but somehow it calms my brain down a little bit. And I also like keeping track of the weight of each yarn ball I break into, so I know exactly how much yarn I used and how much I have left in stash afterwards. And I've never seen a knitting journal with dedicated space for that. So I guess I'm the only knitter who keeps track of that. So when I combine all those little annoyances together, knitting journals end up feeling more frustrating than useful for me personally, and they are usually pretty expensive, at least the ones I've seen so far. So instead, I make my own. I buy a simple A5 notebook from a local stationery shop every January and use it as my knitting notebook for the year. So I pick a fun new color every year and they just make me so happy. So I write absolutely everything knitting related in here. And because it's completely blank, I can decide how much space each project actually needs. Some projects get multiple pages of notes, calculations, and modifications. Others get maybe 3 lines total. And I keep things very simple too. I mostly write in black pen because otherwise I would spend 20 minutes trying to decide which pen color to use instead of actually writing or knitting. So no elaborate decorations, no complicated layouts, just a notebook that works for my brain. And another thing I want to talk about is digital row counters, like the ring ones. And oh my goodness, these look so annoying to me. I'm talking specifically about those little ring style digital row counters that you wear here on your finger. And maybe they're amazing and I'm completely wrong, but every time I see one, all I can think is, wouldn't that get annoying in zero point 0.2 seconds? Don't they restrict your finger movement while knitting? Or fit too tightly or too loosely, and they are basically plastic, so I feel like my finger would start sweating instantly, especially in summer, and I'm assuming they are battery operated too, which means eventually needing replacement batteries, and somehow that already sounds exhausting to me. But clearly people love them, so I'm probably missing something. I just don't know what it is yet. The only row counter I own is this one here, and honestly, I can't even remember the last time I used it. My niece once thought it was the coolest thing ever to spend what felt like hours clicking it non-stop, and the clicky thing here got stuck, but thankfully I managed to fix it because throwing it away felt wasteful. So that's the only one I have, but even before that I barely used it. And the main reason I bought it was because cables terrified me when I first started knitting. I was so scared of losing count and ruining the pattern, but then I discovered I would forget to click the counter anyway, so I'd still lose count. And nowadays I just use a light bulb stitch marker to track my rows, and I learned how to read my knitting when I'm knitting cables. I could see myself using a row counter for something like really intricate lace where counting rows gets really difficult, but I barely knit projects like that, so 99% of the time this thing just lives in a drawer. Now the next thing falls into very cute but not for me category, and I want to talk about themed progress keepers or stitch markers. This one might be the least relatable one on the list. They are adorable, they are fun, they are cute, they make projects feel more personal and seasonal, and I completely understand why people enjoy collecting them. If you were purely about adding a little extra joy to the knitting process, I could absolutely see myself getting into them too. But what always stops me is that they don't look especially practical for the way I knit. A lot of them look kind of heavy, which makes me worry about stretching the stitch they are attached to. And many are made from resin, clay, beads, or even glass or other delicate materials. So I would constantly worry about breaking them accidentally. I feel like I have to think about where I place my project, how I turn my work while knitting flat, whether they are bumping into something in my bag. And I know this sounds dramatic, but I don't really want my stitch markers to require emotional maintenance. The only themed markers I own are these cherry ones that I got at the same knick-knack shop where I got my, can you see? Yeah, this one, where I got that toiletry bag earlier. And at first, I used them constantly because they are genuinely very cute. But nowadays, they mostly live in my pillowcase because I always feel like I'm going to damage them somehow. I have seen some beautiful metal ones too, which would probably solve the fragility issue. But after discovering my nickel allergy recently, I've become a little cautious with metal accessories in general because coatings wear off so quickly on me. I'm talking like if I put on a new necklace this morning, by night the coating is off. And I completely understand why people collect these markers. They make such lovely souvenirs from yarn shops and fiber festivals, and they are also a really nice way to support small makers. I genuinely love that aspect of them, but personally, I know myself well enough to know I probably wouldn't actually use them very much. So if I'm supporting a yarn shop, I usually end up buying yarn or another tool instead. And finally, let's end with what might be my most unpopular opinion in the entire video. Wool detergent or wool wash. I can already hear some people yelling at the screen for this one, but I never really felt the need to buy wool detergent or wash, I don't know how to call it, specifically branded toward knitters. Now, I completely understand that these products are specially formulated with delicate hand knits in mind, which is great, but that doesn't necessarily mean they're the only safe option for washing hand knit garments. And at least where I live, those specialty wool washes can be hard to find, and they are usually much more expensive than the wool detergents I can get at the grocery store while buying my normal groceries. And I don't really understand the need for that in my own knitting life. I'm sure specialty ones smell lovely and have that whole luxury self care experience attached to them, and I completely get why people enjoy that. But I use a grocery store wool detergent and it works perfectly well for me. Knitting already comes with so many dedicated products and accessories that sometimes I just naturally draw a line somewhere, and this is one of those places for me. This is the one I currently use. Before buying it, I actually researched the ingredients a little bit to make sure it was suitable for wool and delicate fibers, didn't contain harsh enzymes or fabric softener and all of that. And I've used it for years now on all my hand knits and never had any issues. And it smells like watermelon, which makes me disproportionately happy. There's actually another wool detergent right next to it at the grocery store that I like the scent of even more, but that one contains enzymes. The company says they use a protease free formula, which should theoretically make it safe for wool, but I still don't fully trust it with my hand knits, so I stick with the watermelon one instead. And those were some of the popular knitting tools I still don't own and probably won't anytime soon. And again, none of this is me saying these tools are bad or unnecessary for everyone. Knitting is such a personal hobby, and I think half the fun is figuring out what genuinely improves your experience and what just doesn't really fit into your knitting life. For me, I've realized I'm happiest keeping my setup fairly simple and only adding tools that I know I'll realistically reach for all the time, but I would genuinely love to know which tools you absolutely swear by. Or maybe which popular ones never really clicked for you either. And if you enjoyed spending some time with me today, don't forget to subscribe, give this video a like before you leave. It really supports my channel and I would love to see you around here again. Thank you so much for being here and I will see you very soon. Bye!